welcome to the Two Real Cinema Club. I'm James Rosica.
And I'm Andres Larete. And at the Two Real Cinema Club, we watch two films, usually one old one new, and we try and draw some comparisons between the two. But this week, everyone here at Two Real has World Cup fever. For nearly a year now, Jimmy and I have known that we've been in Group B. Jimmy's England and my USA. We're in Group B, the second letter of the alphabet, because we are not A-listers by any means. We are the second reel.
We're the B team.
Jimmy, I can't believe it. It's been about a year of the podcast since we did Red Notice way back when. So
you would have thought we would have figured out how to do it by now, wouldn't you?
Exactly. Second year will be better, I'm sure. Unless we have a sophomore slump. Unlike the real World Cup, however, Group B is changing. Portugal is joining our group. And when Portugal joins one of the GOATs, do you guys have this expression in England, the greatest of all time, GOATs?
Yes.
It's sort of an acronym for the greatest.
Yeah, we have that. Yeah.
So Cristiano Ronaldo, of course, he thinks he is the GOAT, but he is not the
He's just
real
been
GOAT.
He's just been fired, hasn't he, I think?
Yes, he has been fired.
Right, yeah.
Banned from England. But he's playing with Portugal. But we have one of the greatest of all times joining us today. The real GOAT is a writer's writer. She's a writer's teacher. She's a film educator and creator and writer of the series Santiago. That's for Portuguese television, so look that one up. She was also the writer on a series for Brazilian HBO called Alice. She's one of our best friends and favorite humans on the planet. Our first guest in 1 year to ride third reel on the Two Real Cinema Club. Welcome, Inês Braga.
Wow, thank you very much. What a nice introduction.
We're a very, very nice person. Are you watching the World Cup?
Yes, I am. I'm very disappointed in Ronaldo, even though I'm probably one of the few here in Portugal, because people still worship him no matter what. But yeah, it's just, so depressing and just horrible, terrible behaviour. I'm very disappointed in him. But anyway, if that fuels, if all that anger fuels and translates into goals, then probably I'll be very happy next week.
Goals at any price then, basically.
Exactly.
So you will be rooting for him even though you're not really a favourite.
I'll be rooting for Portugal, I guess.
Okay.
Yes, and he's part of it. So yeah, if he gives us a goal. But I'm very much rooting for Bruno Fernandes and other players,
Exactly.
That deserve their spots now and have been very, very good. So, yeah, new generation.
The next generation. Awesome. Well, for me, those first games start at 5 a.m. here, so I'm not.
Oh God.
I'm not watching those games, but I do have a long weekend here for American Thanksgiving. So for the next 5 days, I will be watching a lot of football, and some of it early in the morning, as you can tell.
It's refreshing to hear you call it football and not soccer. You've given it a proper name.
Well, now that Inês is here, 2/3 of our audience.
Yeah, it's 2 against 1.
Inês,
You're right.
Yeah. You use the word football, so I have to. But yes, we do say soccer here in the United States. But people are excited here too as well. We had a pretty good performance yesterday, though we did not.
Congratulations, US and England. Yeah, playing really well. I love the England squad, I have to say. I'm very happy. I watched it with my son, who's half British, half Portuguese, and lucky him.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true. Well, we will go mano a mano on Friday, I believe, Jimmy, in football, but today we go mano a mano in film. So this is a football and film podcast.
We should do football and film socials, shouldn't we? Before we talk about the films.
Please do.
Right. So that's what we're all supposed to do at the top of the episode. So. Just to underline, you can find us on Twitter at TwoRealCineClub at twitter.com. Although these days, this week I've been feeling a bit ambiguous about Twitter, so I don't know. So I haven't been looking at the account. You can find us on Instagram, TwoRealCinemaClub at Instagram.com. You can read the blog. That's probably the way to contact us, the TwoRealCinemaclub.com, the blog there. Or you can email us, TwoRealCinemaclub at gmail.com, and tell your friends if you're enjoying the show, football or not. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. And we're on YouTube as well. So you have no excuse. This week we have watched 2 films. The new MCU blockbuster, Wakanda Forever. And we are comparing that with 1984's Quilombo, a Brazilian film, and already I am embarrassed in anticipation of how badly I'm going to pronounce all the Portuguese names in that film. We have a native Portuguese speaker on the pod. So I'm glad this is audio only. Save my blushes.
And I'm glad you're the one presenting that film, because I love saying Quilombo, Palmeiras.
Very good.
And a coche di rene. I love it. We'll talk about that later, I guess. But Wakanda Forever, let's go. 2022, it's a brand new film written and directed by Ryan Coogler with Joe Robert Cole. It's sort of the same team that did Black Panther, which I think was 2018.
Right.
It is 2 hours, 41 minutes. So keep that in mind. Yeah. I certainly did. $500 million. I can say that $500 million gross thus far on a budget of $250 million. So certainly starting to make some money. Features some characters from the earlier film. Letitia Wright is Princess Shuri. Angela Bassett is Queen Ramonda. And Lupita Nyong'o as Naki, I guess her name is. And then
Nakia, I think.
Nakia
is my guess. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Tenoch Huerta is Namor. So he is, I guess these are all characters from Black Panther. I just talked to my stepson who clued me into the fact that Namor does appear in some of the graphic novels or the comic books for the Black Panther series. So for me, he was a new character, but I guess if you're a fan of the series then, or you know the series, then he's not new to you at all. For me, I think my favorite parts of this film are really the homage in the beginning to Chadwick Boseman. I thought it was beautiful. They are sort of mourning T'Challa's death. There's a burial scene and some goodbyes. It's very lovely. There's a similar scene towards the end, which we'll talk about a little bit. But the story starts 1 year later after the last film is finished. The inciting incident is sort of this vibranium mining operation somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. The Wakandans aren't sharing the precious mineral as much as the French and the Americans would like them to, primarily because they have no reason to trust the Americans and the French. So, but out at sea, the Americans are on this sort of military ship looking for the vibranium. They come across this deep sea expedition operation going on where there's this machine sort of mining for vibranium deep in the ocean. Gets a little creepy when one of the Americans in these incredibly bulbous and clumsy deep diving suits sort of disappears, and sure enough, they're under attack. At first, it seems like by sounds. It's like this sonic attack. These almost these sirens of Greek mythology, making these sounds and luring American soldiers like lemmings to their death. If the evil creatures, these blue creatures from the water, can't kill them with sound, they will kill them with physical violence. They're definitely a threat on a couple fronts because they can do it with sound, they can do it with swords.
I found this scene a little bit confusing because it goes all the abyss, doesn't it, for like 5 or 10 minutes, and you have all your standard undersea adventure stuff, and then they seem to be under attack from like a scarlet or purple sort of jellyfish squid.
Yes,
and I was thinking, I thought that was quite interesting, and that really grabbed my attention. And as far as I'm aware, that never came back for the rest of the film. Did it?
Never came back. Yeah, that's why I wasn't even going to mention it, because it doesn't come back.
Never.
It doesn't. But the sea, they're humans. I mean, they come from the sea. They look very ancient. They are sort of in Mayan dress. Their skin is sort of painted or tinted blue, and they are trying to sort of disrupt this whole mining operation. And it sort of cuts there. From there, it goes back to Wakanda. We see Wakanda sort of after T'Challa's death. And sort of towards the end of the first act, Queen Ramonda is taking Shuri to this sacred place. It's a lake, a deep lake in Wakanda, with their elephants sort of swimming there. And they're doing this. She wants Shuri to do this ritual burning of her mourning gown to say, hey, look, T'Challa's been gone for a while. Things are going to change. And sort of just as she's about to say, there's something you should know about your brother T'Challa, And this is a question that burns for a couple of hours because it happens about 40 minutes in. We don't get an answer until the
2
end.
hours and 20 minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you much, much later, or somehow you're going to find out much, much later. Namor emerges from a lake. He's one of these blue creatures, but he has wings on his feet, and he announces that he's very powerful. He can sort of move this machine. He found the machine. Well, the machine sort of ends up on the shore of the lake. The same machine that was mining in the deep Atlantic ends up, but he says, I need your help to find and kill this young American scientist who's responsible for designing this technology that the Americans are using to mine vibranium. And immediately I thought, boy, why doesn't he do this alone? He seems super powerful. I think he can go find the American.
Yeah, if you can lift a tractor on your own, you can use a phone book, can't you? Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So early on, I was kind of suspicious about what was going to be happening. But they certainly take him up on the offer. I think they realize he's so powerful that maybe he could really be a threat to Wakanda. So a couple of the Wakandans, including Princess Shuri, go off to the United States. This is sort of a tour of the world film. It reminded me of like a James Bond thing at times because you're constantly getting the location on Earth of where the action's taking place. Up to this point, only the Wakandans have really mined vibranium, and it turns out this Namor character also has some access to vibranium. And they all sort of agree that if the Americans get it or the French get it, it's not going to be stewarded very well. It's not in good hands with them. And then I think a funny thing in the story for me is there's really not much attention on the Americans at all after this point. They're sort of glossed over and inconsequential. I think they're supposed to be a primary antagonist, but they're not. Part of it seems casting as well to me. They were just not nefarious at all. They were not really clear as villainous characters. Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who's really a comedic actor here, she gets her funny lines in, and it sets up some sort of tonal shifts. Martin Freeman also, I think of as being kind of on that comic edge. And they're sort of given simultaneously too much and too little to do in this story. There's backstory on their marriage, right? But there's no real purpose or volition in their present-day activities. So they do appear, but they're not used very much. Am I completely off base there? I didn't find the Americans to be a danger or a threat, and I also just didn't find it very interesting in the story.
For a film that's 2 hours and 40 minutes long,
yeah,
that entire subplot could easily have been excised utterly and brought the film down a little bit, and we would have missed nothing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
I feel like the only reason those characters existed to set up other films and a TV series later in the year. It feels like it's almost like it's like an embedded advert rather than a proper bit of storytelling.
Or to the contrary, I thought you could expand that story. If you got 2 hours and 41 minutes, you could make it longer. So that's why I thought either too much or too little. I mean, probably, as you said, too much. You could have just taken them out entirely. Yeah.
There's such strong actors that you're always waiting for something to happen, and then it doesn't. It really doesn't move on. So it's like, okay,
never get something to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's almost like intentionally wrong-footing us. We think something's going to happen. It's supposed to maybe introduce some tension, but I think they're just underwritten. And as probably Jimmy said, there are always sequels to these films. So yes, it's set up where we think we're going to see the Ross character played by Martin Freeman again in the future. Yeah. By the way the story plays out. So I think you're right. I think it is sort of setting up a later story. So they are, Shuri and one of her partners are going into the United States. They're going to end up at, I guess it was MIT. So they start out in Virginia briefly. Then I think they went up to Massachusetts, Boston area to go to MIT to find this very, very talented young engineer. She's 19 years old. Her name is Riri. She's played by Dominique Thorne, and she's this amazing scientist who has all these inventions, even though she's very, very young. And immediately you think, well, I don't want to see this girl killed on screen. Why does that guy Namor want to kill her? And I mean, it makes him a good antagonist in the early going, but we start to lose him as an antagonist because we get this sort of double origin story where Namor takes Riri and Shuri to his world. It's Tolucan, which is an underwater paradise in Central America. He shows him this beautiful world. People are floating around. But he gives Shuri another one of these crazy diving suits. It looks so awkward because she's just she's like 3 or 4 times the size of her actual body. And Just clumsy. It's no movement whatsoever. It reminds me of one of these little onesies that the babies sometimes wear. I imagine it like full of melons or something like that, so that you can't possibly swim or move. Very awkward. But anyway, they get down there, and there are some wonderful time jumps. I like to the sort of the 1500s, the Spanish conquest and discovery. The Spaniards sort of had an idea about the vibranium back then, but Namor and his people used it against the conquistadors. And it's just that for me, after a few years of seeing Black Panther, I could have used a bit more development and reminders of Wakanda, but all of a sudden I'm in this other world. Yeah. And I felt like I was getting these two worlds built for me at the same time. So I think the film sort of loses quite a bit of pace. I didn't even talk about sort of this overly long action sequence where the engineer is sort of escaping with Shuri in Boston, and they managed to. And again, it was funny because the I guess I would call them the Tolucans. I guess they show up in Boston, so he's asked them to go get the scientist, but then all of a sudden his people show up there anyway. Like they are the ones who end up taking her away in the first place. So it's a lot of sort of mixed intentions, I guess, and. So I suppose I'm supposed to not fully trust Namor and his people, and I think that's why that's all there. But there's a long 10 or 15-minute action sequence where we do get to see Martin Freeman a little bit and Julia Louis-Dreyfus. So we're sort of getting all these people at once. But I think motivations are a little bit questionable at that point.
Yeah.
Did you guys get the sense that Namor wanted to use the Wakandans to get back at the Americans, or that he could have just done all this on his own, but he had some other idea?
Personally, I read it as face value that he was asking them to do his dirty work because, presumably MIT is more than 1 mile away from the waterfront or something like that. So yes. he has no reach that far. Yeah. But looking back on it, you think, oh yeah, I'm sure there's supposed to be some kind of rather more complicated. Oh, that was my plan all along plot line. But I don't think it's clearly communicated in the film. The whole thing feels a little bit sort of muddy and blurry, and it just feels like people with outlandish costumes shaking their fists at each other, and I'm not entirely sure exactly how it is they all mesh together. So I did think that this action sequence was the first point in the film where I thought, oh great, now we're actually getting into gear, and we're seeing a little bit of kind of proper kinetic action and fun. And I still think actually that's about the most fun I had in the whole film, was that nighttime chase sequence through. It'll be Boston, won't it? Is that right?
It ends up in Boston. They're on a bridge across the Charles River. Yeah, which is honestly, at this point, you don't really know that he's from Central America, but it's a lot closer to Boston than Wakanda is. So you think, in terms of, but distance doesn't really matter. Later on, he swims to Cape Verde in about 5 minutes. So
that was so. Honestly, I have to say, when he just goes to Cape Verde, I was like, oh my god, what is this? And again, just for 5 minutes, why did he go to Cape Verde? I don't know. Yeah. It was just, so I totally agree in terms of motivations, and also the backstory didn't explore that, so it just takes us into different directions. But again, I agree with Jimmy. I'm sure in 3 more films they will explain that, he was after something else. Yes. Apparently it wasn't vibranium, it was to avenge his mother. But yeah, we shall see.
Yeah, I think it's probably a good idea to keep in mind that this is like a chapter of a much larger piece, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a universe, exactly. It's huge. So
it's like selling a book where you have to pay like top dollar for each chapter that you get, isn't it? It's like you expect to pay again for the next chapter and again for the next chapter.
And I remember how disappointed you were when you found out that Dune was part 1.
Yes, exactly.
There's another one to come.
But this is worse, isn't it? This is like, part 26. Keep on coming, yeah.
But I guess with these, you've got a built-in audience. A really interesting theme that I think goes underexplored came to me around this point. There's this knowledge of the wisdom of the ancients in both worlds, both in Tulukan and in Wakanda. But it seems that they are almost sort of paying lip service to the lessons of history. I don't think it really comes out that strongly, but there is this one theme statement. I think it comes from Shuri. She says, Black Panther's a relic. And I really like this idea, and I think this is a vital idea of marrying natural and ancient ritual with modern technology. This is the exact line that I think we're sort of navigating right now in the world, is like, how do we preserve the natural world, and a lot of this remember the lessons of the past, but move forward using technology to survive, cooperatively. The theme is in there. I just didn't think it was that. I mean, maybe I pulled it out and it's not in there, but I think it's in there, just hinted, and maybe, again, with a multi-film series, we've got to think, okay, maybe they're going to get there eventually.
No, I agree. I think that theme was pretty clear. I do believe that was one of the strongest points. It's trying to, of course, like there's the theme of grief, and that is your main one. But I think that sense of resources, like how scarce they are, and how we should protect our environment, and the ancestors, and even the conflict between the old and new, and who should you listen to. I think that was well explored. I feel that was one of the clearest through lines I felt.
And I think the thing that made me think of it as a theme was that I was wondering, do you really have to kill the scientist? That seems like an old school thought. Like if someone has done something that might threaten you, you kill him, you take care of him. Whereas I think the scientist is actually doing something that could improve things in the future. So this whole idea that Riri had to be killed because she'd come up with this invention seemed very archaic, I guess.
Probably had some influence from Twitter at the time, and so decided to kill technology. They had like 2 releases of the film, one pre and post.
But I'd say just to be clear with Elon Musk, we have no intention of killing Twitter. So it's unclear at times if Tolukan is an enemy or an ally. I think that's intentional. So there is some sort of tension that brings us through the story. They do venture a little bit into world politics, but I don't think it does a great job there. It's probably not supposed to, but ultimately Shura and Namor they sort of agree that they want to burn this whole thing down together, the whole world down together. And it's not clear if that's really actually destruction, which I don't think it is, or sort of ending things as they are right now with these wars over vibranium or these conflicts between cultures. So we get to the great scene where Shuri is in Namor's world, and he's sort of got her captured there, and Queen Ramonda goes on this quest to Haiti, I got to mention that quickly, where she gets Nakia to help help the escape of Shuri in Tolukan.
Yeah.
But she meets him in Cape Verde, so he swims quite quickly, I guess, to meet with her. And while it's a double cross, really, while he is meeting with her, Nakia runs into the Tolukan world. She has a much more streamlined watercraft that takes her down there quite swimmingly, I'll say, and rescues Shuri and Riri, the engineer from Tolukan. And he's pissed off, and he will seek revenge. And that revenge is basically this major water attack on Wakanda. So he's the world of water. He can actually sort of move the ocean and move the water. And Wakanda is sort of inundated, both with Tolukan's people as well as water. And it sort of starts to destroy Wakanda. And this is this takes us sort of towards the end of Act 2. There's a major action scene. It's all this destruction, and it really shows his power, Tolukan's power, Namor's power. And Queen Ramonda dies. She's sacrificing her own life to save the life of Riri, the scientist who has invented this vibranium extraction device. And of course, Namor, this is still the one that Namor wants to kill. So she pisses him off again by saving the engineer. There's another funeral because now Shuri's mother, the Queen Ramonda, has also died. And it also means that Shuri is the leader of Wakanda. Sort of. For the time being, anyway. That leads to the classic montage. New inventions giving birth to new power suits. Both Riri and Shuri are working on these new sort of Black Panther suits or these superhero suits. And then Shuri sort of gets injected with some of the it's really the DNA of T'Challa, I guess. And she has this hallucination scene where she channels Killmonger, the Michael B. Jordan character. And he's exploring what kind of power, what kind of leader she will be. There's a lot of fighting in the factions within Wakanda at this point. I think there's this sense that maybe she's not going to be the leader. It sort of threatens the success of the country going forward. Reminds me a little bit, there's a scene in Quilombo which is kind of quite similar. But she's scared because she feels like she might be more like the Killmonger leader as opposed to the T'Challa leader.
I mean, he is definitely in favor of burning it all down, isn't he?
That's
his whole kind of philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where this next scene goes. I mean, I think the big falling action is this battle between Wakanda all the Wakandans are sort of on a ship. They're taking it. She wants to sort of get into his world on the water world, but then she wants to dry him out. She wants to dry Namor out because she thinks that's his weakness, his Achilles heel, because he's a water person ultimately. They fight on the sea. There's this sort of simultaneous fight, this mano-a-mano scene of Shuri is now the Black Panther. She's in the suit. She and Namor are just going mano-a-mano on the land, where he's going to start having trouble breathing. There are also plenty of moments where he and his people do pretty well breathing air with minimal technology. That's where I thought all of a sudden they can breathe the air pretty well because they're kicking some ass too. It's definitely an equal battle, even though technically I think they'd have problems with oxygen, but I that's beyond me, so I'm not even going to try to explain that.
Yeah, not clear what the rules are, as it is not clear.
And then she hears these whispers from, I think it's Killmonger, or no, it's from her mother, Ramonda, like, show him who you are. And Killmonger, as Killmonger, when she channels Killmonger, she kills, or it seems like she's going to kill Namor. But when she channels Ramonda, she sort of saves him. And there's this theme again of burning the earth together. And they sort of end up on this little bit of island in their final battle. And this island is kind of burning up. There's just fire happening everywhere. Final resolution, there's a peace that's brokered. The surface world and the water world are kind of united, at least, and not at war. Namor goes into this kind of long explanation to his people. He pleads with them to put down their weapons or whatnot and have peace. But Shuri, she can just shout, Wakanda Forever! And everything's okay. They say, yes, we understand Wakanda Forever. That's it. So it's very funny because, it's that moment in a film where you get one of these cliched speeches and all that from a leader. It comes from Namor much more than it does from Shuri. She's very eloquent and very, very terse. That's all she says, and that is enough to do it. And then I was thinking at this point, well, what about this thing that I'm supposed to know about the brother T'Challa? There's a late surprise, as I guess there always is in these films. I'm not a connoisseur or an expert on these films, but in the credits, final credits, is another beautiful homage, I thought, to Chadwick Boseman, because finally Shuri is in a place to burn her mourning gown, and she's in Haiti with her sister, or her sister-in-law, I guess. And it turns out that Nakia and T'Challa had a son whose Haitian name is Toussaint, after Toussaint Louverture, but his Wakandan name is T'Challa. And I think this sets up many, many sequels to come and billions of dollars. And I think someday someone should do a popcorn counter on sequels, Jimmy.
Hey, it's a good idea. God damn, it's a brilliant idea.
Talk about setting things up, huh?
You can bet that Marvel have already signed that 5-year-old kid to a very favourable 8-picture deal, haven't they?
He'll be in training. Yeah. He'll be doing every martial art you can imagine for the next few years on all sorts of nutritional supplements. He'll be buff and a great actor, I'm sure. So I have a few notes and thoughts, but I'd love to hear what our guest has to say. And as you always, Jimmy, as well. So
well, I was trying, to lose sort of my cynicism. I'm not a huge sort of Marvel fan. I prefer DC. I have to say.
Get off this podcast.
This is your last appearance on the podcast.
Terrible. Well, if one day you would like to hire me, of course, you're my favorite. But actually, there was a really nice. Well, I love Letitia Wright. I love the cast. I think they're great, and the entrance of Lupita Nyong'o is just really brilliant. I really liked. I think there's a really nice sort of female power in it, and she, Letitia, I think is just wonderful. There's a grace about her, and I think it was very, very difficult to fill in those shoes, and she does it in a way, in her very own way, which I think is quite remarkable. And it was quite nice in the cinema, which actually made me enjoy the film a bit more. It was just me alone and lots of high school students. So the sort of vibe in the room was incredible because they were clapping, crying, shouting, Wakanda Forever! I was like, oh my God. So then suddenly there was this sort of community feel, this communal, and even though there was a very mixed audience, which I liked, it was very nice to see this youth after the pandemic, all united, shouting Wakanda Forever. And in terms of, the messages that it tries to tell the world, it's quite good, and I think we should remind ourselves about the power of films like this, and there is certainly a power there that is quite special. It's definitely too long. I do think that there's a lot of characters that are underwritten, including those two that we talked about. There's long sequences. I think the Talocan, the history, his motivations are definitely underwritten. Of course, they will be in another film, and that is a bit disappointing, I guess. But if you suspend your disbelief and your cynicism a bit, it's a very enjoyable film. Definitely far too long, but and it has very moving scenes. Definitely like the T'Challa moments, the Chadwick Boseman's tribute is just very, very moving. And the final scene, even though I felt like it was definitely too long, but when she is there by the fire in Haiti, it's just it's incredibly moving, and even that that credits scene is also very beautiful. So you have to, and I think he dealt with it with a lot of sensitivity, Ryan Coogler. I think he dealt with it in a very sort of earnest way, which I guess is the Marvel way also. So that's why they were a very good fit. But it was quite a challenge, and I think he did quite well in that respect.
Isn't it amazing that I think the most touching, the most human moments are featured around a character who's not even there?
Yeah.
That was the most moving stuff, and he's not there. But it was very well done.
Yeah, but that's credit to, he was just really special. He was just a really, really special guy. So, and I think, and that came across, which I think it was very good.
I do have a bit of either a question or an observation about the political content of the film, because it spends most of its running time setting up kind of basically two groups of oppressed minorities, doesn't it? There are the Wakandans, who are they have a booming economy and they're doing very well, but they talk about the colonizers constantly, and they're very conscious that they are surrounded by hostile and aggressive people who want to come in and take their resources. So we have one oppressed minority here, and then we have a second oppressed minority based on the kind of the Mayan people, who then become the underwater people, and they also are kind of protective and fearful of the outside world, and they want to hang on to what they've got. And I think the film, I'm not sure whether it's clever or whether it is cack-handed, that the film basically takes these two oppressed minorities and we, the audience, watch them beat the heck out of each other in the climax, while there are some white Europeans just in the background, basically rubbing their hands together, waiting for the fighting to die out so they can then go in and take the resources. It reminded me a little bit of that kind of that sort of 90s conspiracy about how the CIA were the people who invented crack.
Yes,
and then they would basically just feed it into the ghetto and then stand back while kind of all the urban guys would just shoot each other and do the job of the CIA for them.
Yeah, in lots of American cities that was a theory. Remember LA, Chicago, all of those. It was. I remember like South LA, East LA, there was an article about it that, they were just waiting for the two minorities, the gangs, no matter what gangs they were, just to die out of OD'd on crack. It's just, bizarre. But I remember reading an article about it.
And kind of at the end of the film, we get this kind of the thing, I think, which the story is trying to draw us towards, like the moment when the two factions kind of unite. But I think it just slightly fluffs that ending. I think it doesn't quite feel climactic; it feels anticlimactic. And even at the end, when Namor has this speech, to his people, or to his kind of second in command or whatever, and I didn't quite understand.
I think it's his cousin.
Is that right?
Namor.
What I didn't understand was whether he was saying, "Oh, I'm playing a long game here." And and actually, I'm going to betray them further down the road. Or was he saying? He seemed to be kind of saying, "Oh, we're not defeated now. We're allies, and Wakanda will need us." I didn't quite understand what the play was here, and whether is the film trying to transmit a message about togetherness or about people who are oppressed joining up together to try and overcome, or is it just saying, "Oh well, These people from minorities, they'll always betray you in the end, and they'll just keep fighting amongst each other while the Europeans sort everything out." I just felt like, I don't know. Maybe it is it just shows how unintelligent I was going in. But I find it difficult to wheedle out exactly what the theme was, or what the kind of the moral they were trying to expound was.
Even because, you had the sense at the end that Namora will betray and she will probably kill Namor and then fight Wakanda. I don't know, I have that feeling. But yes, the message, I think your observation is spot on, Jimmy.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it perfectly. And it's almost too real in the sense that it's a reflection of human history. It's exactly what's happened again and again.
Exactly.
And it's not lost on me that this one character, the Martin Freeman character, Ross, the white guy, is freed. He escapes at the very end. No blame whatsoever. He's actually going to infiltrate Wakanda. It looks like next, not really infiltrate. He's going to be invited into that culture, I imagine, in the future film. That's certainly how it's set up. So I mean, it's not lost on me at all. And maybe that's intentional, that they want to reflect this world where brown oppressed people and black oppressed people can get into fights because the white Europeans are playing this game so well and getting them to fight against each other.
Manipulating
So if
them.
these two cultures are at war, guess who's going to slip in and get all the vibranium? It's going to be the French and the Americans that we saw at the beginning. So I couldn't tell if it's either really astute politically, or they're not really concerned enough about the politics to sort of work it out logically, but they know it's there. So there are a couple things in this film that I think are...
They've got to know, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're surprisingly astute in a couple ways, and either it's so subtle that it seems that they're not doing it correctly, or they're so darn good that they're pulling it off. I can't tell. But I mean, so much of this film, I love the Enlightenment features, like black female characters with lots of agency out there kicking ass. I mean, we've never seen that on screen before, right? Wakanda, this beautiful black African country with this advanced technology and this culture that I still, after 2 films, I still want to see how that place works a lot better.
And the opening sequence is beautiful, isn't it? The opening sequence is really, really stunning.
There are all these, I think, advanced things, but one thing that comes back to me is the same thing that happened in the first film that really bothered me, was that ultimately there's this hint again of a battle at a waterfall to determine the leader. Like, sure, he's going to have to battle someone. It comes down to this violent decision. It's totally anti-democratic in the sense that it's monarchy. The Queen's death justifies countless Wakandans dying because of this one person. And I think there's this real mix of, there's a lot of progress being made in these films and in these imaginary cultures, but at the same time, they're still playing by these old rules. And again, I'm not entirely sure if that's intentional and they just want to show what reality is, or if they're just not as concerned with that. They know what they need to do to make a Marvel film, and maybe they're sneaking some bigger ideas in, or maybe they're just really following the Marvel format so well. I couldn't give you a straight answer one way or the other.
One other thing I just wanted to quickly say was I thought the underwater photography in this film was fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought the kind of the above water photography was fairly workmanlike, but the underwater stuff was really terrific. I thought, to the extent I spent quite a bit of the running time thinking, how did they do that?
Yeah.
I was kind of thinking, are they really underwater? Is it just CGI? How have they done this? It looks fantastic.
And did they beat Avatar to something here? Because Avatar is going deep underwater here soon too, right?
God.
Where did I read somewhere? Someone said, it's probably going to be the second best film about underwater blue people that we'll see all year. For all the interesting political ramifications and all the kind of the hits or the misses on the storytelling, I do think I'm going to have to put in a call to the Cliche Squad.
Cliche Squad.
Oh, Cliche Squad. Yes, go, please. Where?
I tell you what, the big cliche for me is warehouses. This is the second time we've seen this quite recently. We saw the same thing when we did Do Revenge. Somehow students seem to have massive warehouses, either where they can do art or where they can do enormous engineering projects.
It's so ridiculous, honestly. I have to say, really, that scene, I was like, oh my goodness.
When you were students, did you get warehouses? Did I maybe just not pick up the keys for mine?
No.
I never got given a warehouse.
Cars, motorbikes,
But there's some generous scholarships in this country. I know that everyone says it's really expensive to go to school, but some of these schools do give some generous scholarships. But yeah, she also had a beautiful. I mean, she had gear too, not just the space. She had the gear. She had stuff to make stuff. Yes, that is... Oof.
Another role that was totally underwritten, her role.
It was. And I think, again, this is a role that I think we'll probably see more in the future. I'm not entirely sure, but...
I think they're setting her up for her own television series. So this is this is a very bare-bones introduction to someone who I think is quite an interesting character in the comics. But there was virtually nothing to her in this film, which is a shame. Missed opportunity.
Yeah, definitely.
I agree. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, I think should we have a little break?
I think we should, yeah.
And then we'll come back and we'll return to South America.
And we're going to savage the Portuguese language, but we've got Inês here to correct us.
Right, we'll take a break and we'll be back with Quilombo.
Hey, Jimmy, Inês,
Yep.
my friends at World Beer United sent me an email just before the pod. They're asking for a quick mention because this is a very difficult time for them. The decision to have the World Cup in Qatar became even more absurd last Friday when it was ultimately in added time. The organizers showed World Beer United a straight red card prohibiting sales of alcohol during the event and limiting it to hotels in really boring, sterile, safe drinking spaces. So I just asked myself, and I think they're curious too, what was the foul that beer committed? Why is beer suddenly offside?
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
Like the real offside rule, no one understands.
No one understands.
We know that beer is now out of play and has been substituted with crap. Qatar. Think about Qatar. This is a country that usually gives the money and runs. In this case, they are taking the money and running.
Yeah.
To the tune of $75 million US.
My goodness.
I don't know if you guys in the 1980s had Wendy's hamburgers, but we used to have these advertisements that popularized the expression, "Where's the beef?"
That even made it here, yeah.
Good. We're asking, where's the beer? Really. Presumably, there is a shite load of beer still in the country after delivery. It's probably sitting in warehouses somewhere in that small country. And if I know the English fans and the Portuguese fans, quite frankly, they're going to sniff it out, find it, and all hell will break loose on those streets of Qatar.
Yeah.
And it's not.
Because probably you can't drink them on the street, so you have to go to these either hotels, so they probably want you to spend all this money in these particular restaurants and hotels, so you can get totally wasted, but then they call you a taxi, so that you're not seen vomiting anywhere, apart from the poor guy's taxi.
That spoils the fun.
Yeah.
I have this other idea, though, too. I think the Qatar is going to just turn around and sell all this beer or the re-gift it to their friends, because I think their next bribery campaign is for the Winter Olympics. That's what I'm thinking. They want the next Winter Olympics. So I'm also just concerned that they'll
be... it'd be beautiful. Those massive ACs that they have now in the stadium.
Mountains? Come on.
What could go wrong?
So I also worry that there are going to be millions of fans experiencing, and Jimmy, you can help me with this, the delirium tremens or the DTs. And they're going to overload there's probably one hospital in Doha, right? So at this time, I just want to raise a toast to beer. Sometimes it takes the piss, sometimes it makes you pissed, and it always gets you pissed. But at this time, I want to drink in solidarity with the beer people, even the Cud Riser sponsor, and I want to thank you for their service.
Thank you.
But Jimmy and Inês, right here in the copy, they sort of sent me this ad copy, and they said that I should ask you two to speak passionately about some of your experiences with beer and or other intoxicating beverages.
I was so enthusiastic about beer that I and this other guy wrote an entire film script about beer. If you remember, yes.
Oh, God, that's my script with you, yes. Pub guard. All right. Touche, that's good. That's good. What about Inês? Do you have some experiences with beer that you want to talk about?
You can't watch football without beer, you know.
Precisely,
it's just ridiculous, you know. It's just, I don't know, like really, I can't dissociate the two.
It does sound like a brilliant setup for a Three Kings style remake movie.
To go in for the beer,
about some football fans who go to find the hidden beer out in the desert.
Nice. Well, here we go. In conclusion, whether on offense or defense, beer is a winner. Do you know why they called the beer Cud Riser? This is because no matter how long you drink or chew it, and no matter how many stomachs you have, one, you will vomit someday, and two, it will still be crap. However, beer, we love and miss you, and Cudriser, don't worry, we know you will be back and all over the flippin' place in 2026 for the World Cup in Canada, the United States.
Woohoo! Cheers! Salud!
We're back. Having enjoyed a beer, we're going to talk about another film about oppressed minorities. Quilombo, 1984 film from Brazil, directed by Carlos Diegues, written by Diegues with João Felicio dos Santos and Decio Freitas. Now, I am not aware of this guy's work at all. Inês, do you know about this guy?
Yes, he's very well known. People know him as Kaká Diegues, and he's one of the fathers of Cinema Novo, which was this. It's called New Cinema, and it came on the back of the French New Wave and Italian neorealism. And it started in the 50s and 60s, and Kaká Diegues is one of them. It's quite interesting because he did quite big budget films. I think 70s and 80s. One was called Bye Bye Brazil, which is very well known.
Right,
and God is Brazilian. And at the time, I remember there were big budget films, like $10 million or something. So, they were huge. And he's still alive, and he's very well respected. Yes, but he, the Cinema Novo died in Brazil, as all the movements did. But he's still very respected in Brazil. Hasn't done that many movies. This one was huge at the time. Was a big landmark. But I'll let you carry on with the introduction.
So this is a film. This is set in the 17th century in Brazil. Mm-hmm. It begins on a sugar plantation. There is a whole bunch of slaves who are working for the colonizers on the sugar plantation, and there's a breakout. They kill the slave drivers. They run off into the sugar fields, and basically they have a choice. Some of the slaves want to return back to Africa, return to the motherland, but the others want to go to this mythical place called Palmares. Now, am I saying that right? I feel so self-conscious.
No, that was very good. Palmares,
right? Palmares.
yeah.
Palmares, okay. So that's your polite way of saying you got it wrong.
Don't worry, I'm married to a man that after 12 years can't still pronounce my name properly, so you're totally forgiven, Jimmy. He'll be listening to this and he'll be like, what?
I was going to say, it's also so refreshing to have someone polite on the podcast.
Yeah, that never normally happens.
That's why you invited me, right? Yeah.
So a bunch of these escaped slaves, they pick up some other malcontents on the way, and a big group of them. They make it to this mythical place, this mountaintop nation within a nation, Palmares. Mm-hmm. There now, it's a settlement of freed slaves, of free men. It's ruled by this very kind of elderly sage called Akotirenes.
Acochirene.
Yeah. Oh my God! I'm glad the camera's not on because you can't see me blush.
They're difficult names, I have to say.
She lives in this amazing kind of like earthen castle, which seems to be made out of pots. It's like everywhere. It's like thousands of pots, just absolutely incredible. And she recognizes that she's elderly, she hasn't got long to go, so she passes her crown on to one of these new guys, one of the new slaves who's arrived, who gets the name Gangazumba.
Yeah.
He's going to be the leader of Palmares. And she kind of departs like on the shoulders of a young warrior. It's this lovely kind of, she walks off into the mist, like sort of carried like she's a child. It's really sweet.
It's a beautiful scene,
yeah. So this is an epic. The next scene is 5 years later. Mm-hmm. So some Portuguese colonizers, they turn up, and their intention is either to try and conquer Palmares or at least to try and steal some slaves. They're ambushed by the people of Palmares. The attack goes wrong, but they do manage to steal one child, who is Namba, who's a child that we saw being born as soon as the freedmen arrived 5 years ago. So they snatch this child, and then we cut to 15 years later. The child is now an adult. He's a slave to a priest in a settlement. And this is this kind of momentous year. It's 1664. There is a plague. The comet passes overhead. The boy is an adult. And that night he escapes. And again, it's another kind of quite sweet, some symbolic scene. He's dressed up like a Portuguese man. And he sneaks out, and he's got a choice of things to take, and he chooses to take some food, but he chooses to leave the crucifix, and it's this big symbol. He manages to return to Palmares. He takes this long, impossible climb up the cliff face to get there. And when he arrives, there's a big party going on. There's dancing, and he's welcomed back into the bosom of the family that he lost. Although his mother was killed at the time that he was stolen. So Portuguese turn up again. They try to invade. The Portuguese colonizers this time, they're a bunch of guns for hire who would like to accept the money without doing the work. So they just kill one guy and then go back and claim that they've conquered the entire settlement. But they're so incensed, the citizens of Palmar are so incensed that they vow revenge. The returned boy, Namba, he becomes the avenging warrior. He gets a new name now. He's called Zumbi, and he gets this kind of magic spear from the heavens. This kind of flaming spear. It's almost like a kind of a Greek myth or like a European myth. But the worry is that the free country of Palmares will always be at war with the Portuguese settlers. So they have this big debate: should they leave the mountain where they've been safe to avoid war, or should they remain there and defend? And Gangazumba, the leader, he decides, no, I'm going to take anybody who wants to down to the waterside, I think. So they go down to the desert and to the waterside, and they're going to set up anew there where they're not going to be threatened by the Portuguese. But it turns out to be a terrible mistake. He gets poisoned. They return. So the two different groups of the freedmen return back to the mountains. In 1694, the Portuguese invade for the last time. This time they bring the big guns, literally. They have cannons. There's a big battle. Hundreds of extras. There's this whole bunch of explosions, there's mist everywhere, big fight scene. And in the end, Palmares is burned. There is a rout. But the idea of the nation lives on in the people who escape. And so Palmares, although we've seen the story for a century, the place is destroyed, but the idea of the place continues.
Yes.
So I'd never seen this film, never heard of this film, never heard of the director. I'm not sure that I have knowingly seen any Brazilian films in the past. I'm embarrassed to say. I guess I must have done, but nothing comes to mind. And the thing that most struck me about this film is just how myth-like it is. It reminded me a little bit of when we saw The Northman, and my overwhelming impression from that film was that it was this notion of a story world where the magical and the real exist in the same space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's this kind of strange sort of magical sensation to the world of Palmares. It seems to consist of like some tunnels and caves, and there's this huge sort of earthen fort, and there are the thousands of pots, and it's somehow otherworldly, and yet also it's very, very kind of physically there. It's very palpable. It's very real.
Yeah.
And it's a clever sleight of hand, I think, to be able to keep the two worlds, on screen at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Had you seen it before?
I had seen it like many years, but I didn't really pay attention. I was quite young. It was on television, but I remember talking about it when I lived in Brazil, in Rio, having like a debate. We were talking about, of course, like the Brazilians. saying how bad the Portuguese were, and then rightly so. And I'm glad, this is a discussion that is happening more and more in Portugal these days, because before it was this idea that, we were great colonizers, and Dom Pedro, like the king, preferred Brazil to Portugal and all of this, and we were magnanimous and we weren't as bad as the Dutch or the English, and it's just all bullshit. So I'm glad that now people are actually questioning and looking deep into our history, and yes, and I'm hoping that there will be a lot more sense of an apology and recognizing things that were done very wrongly, and I think there's still a long way to go, but I'm glad that this conversation has started. The actors are incredibly well known. They are, and even the soundtrack was done by Gilberto Gil.
So he I had heard of.
He goes to the UK a lot, and he's an amazing musician. Him, Caetano Veloso are like the voices of a generation, the voices of a movement. And Gilberto Gil was the Minister of Culture. Back in 2005 and 2006, I was lucky enough to actually meet him in Cannes when Sérgio Machado, the director I work with, had the film Lower City there, and he came to the screening, and it was a very strong moment for Brazil culturally and economically. But some of the actors like António Popeu, who plays Zumbi, Zezé Mota, that plays Dandara, Vera Fischer, who is the white Ana de Ferro, which is almost like Iron Anna, and António Pitanga. They're very, very, very well known and incredible actors. It's some of them, like Vera Fischer, I didn't remember at all that she was in it, and then she's incredible.
I loved the acting in this film, but it felt very it kind of reminded me of a realist film or something like that. If you had told me that they were largely non-professional actors, there's something just like a little bit affectless and
they were all very young. There was probably like their first film. They were probably, this was their first film or the second film. I don't know. I didn't really read about it, but I imagine it was. But it
just seems so very, very sincere somehow. The acting, it's entirely not put on.
And I think they all realised they were making something quite big. To have done a film like this in the 80s. It's quite incredible, and like how they resisted. And something that you mentioned, Jimmy, that is I love about Brazilian history is how they mix, for instance, nature and this sort of magical, like the orixás, which is like something that is still very present, for instance, in Bahia. These rituals that are associated to the traditional West African gods, and that they believe that you can, worship many spirits, and they all have different names and are associated to certain foods, the colors, the days of the weeks, these orixás and candomblé, and there's certain things like the shells and all the things that they represent. There's also like the martial arts. I don't know if you noticed, like capoeira, that they practice, like zumbi and even ganga zumba. It's just it's all pretty special and all very sort of ingrained in the culture. And if you think about even now, when that ritual, when ganga zumba is when he dies, it really reminded me of the opening of Wakanda. It was the same type of rituals, the same type of sequence, and when you look back and see that this was done like 40 years ago, it's pretty incredible.
I mean, Andres, you suggested this film. Were you aware of the astonishing parallels with Wakanda Forever when you suggested it? Because it's amazing how these two films go together. There's something wrong with my brain, honestly. It came. First of all, I wasn't even going to suggest Wakanda Forever, and then as soon as I said it, it was just because it was in the theaters here. And as soon as I said it, it was in that moment that when we were talking, I just said Quilombo would be perfect. So
how did you know about Quilombo?
I think I've got such a sponge with films, and I've seen this film in two different settings. I saw it miraculously twice. There was an international film series in Colorado when I lived out there at the university. So I saw it there first, and that was probably early 90s. So it was already maybe 10 years old. And then for some reason there was a VHS copy of it in the library in Colorado as well. So then I saw it again. So it's a film I know pretty well. It's a film that, I thought it would pair together pretty well, in part because I think Wakanda has the potential to be this kind of film. Quilombo's, it's not, it's hokey. There's some of the violence is hokey. Some of the acting, especially among the extras, is really hokey. But the ideas are so solid. And I think, overall there's this sort of, and I think Gilberto Gil at some point in his lyrics, he says something about black joy being a weapon. And Zumbi says the cross is no use unless it's picked up and used as a sword.
Yeah, as a sword. When you turn it, right? Yeah. So
but
powerful.
and then he also, one of the last lyrics I think was Utopia, one for all and all for one, Quilombo.
Yeah.
And he talks about it being a many-colored peacock.
A black
and
El Dorado grew.
Yeah. And Ganga Zumba, he's really intent on bringing in Anna and bringing in all sorts of different people. So this film is really all about utopia. And Jimmy, I think you sort of hammered it earlier. Utopia is real. There's something very obvious about it when you see it. These different cultures have come together and they were oppressed, but they've become independent and wealthy on their own. But then utopia is also an idea. Like you carry it, that it's going to sort of dissolve, but it's going to sort of integrate itself into Brazilian culture after this point. And so I think it's just got these tremendous ideas. It's a peculiar film in some ways because it's written kind of in chapters. I think it was a novel, right? I think that the source material is novelistic, and you sort of get these chapters.
It's based on, like on history. There was this settlement, called Quilombo, and there were about, I think, 18 expeditions of the Portuguese trying to conquer it, and I think that's why it was like almost over a century or almost a century. And it's pretty incredible, and I love the sense of utopia and the fact that they had, they worked with the indigenous people, with the white women, and it was like a real, they wanted this settlement for all, and when we were talking, Jimmy, about like Wakanda and being like about two minorities but probably killing each other, like in this sense, no, like the minorities protected each other against the whites, right? So it's much clearer in that sense what they were trying to achieve.
I think the music is so joyous too. That's all. You've got this anachronistic soundtrack, right? You've got this sort of 80s samba, but we're talking about 16th, 17th, 18th century Brazil, and it's just so joyful. So I mean, it's exactly what you want Utopia to be, a big samba dance, right? And that's it sort of comes through in the movie.
But I mean, they mix it together, don't they, with like sort of 80s digital drums, and then there's there's like the African drumming as well, and then there's this kind of Latin music. It's amazing.
It's a flawed film, I guess it is. It's dated, it's flawed, but this what I like about it is like the intention is very noble and is well accomplished in that respect. That is true to what is set out to do, and it's true to his message.
I was just going to say, a few minutes ago, I was talking about how, there are a couple of themes that I really love in Wakanda, Wakanda Forever, but I really had to, seek them out. I had to dig them out. This film has its ideas, and they're right there on the surface, and it's just so pleasing to see that. So that's why another reason I love it. Yeah.
There's some great filmmaking in this movie as well. I made a few little notes about how it really plays on the four elements. That there's fire, air, and water and earth, and they're really kind of right there on the screen. It's like there's something distinctly elemental about the story, which is I think what gives it that mythic kind of taste. And I don't think anyone has mentioned the costumes yet. Which are probably greater stars of the show than the actors. Some of the costumes just incredible. There's this kind of strange magical thing where Ganga Zumba. He transforms into the leader that he becomes, and it's like he's sometimes literally portrayed by a different actor who wears this kind of woolen white mask over his face. But but it's the same person, but it's a different person. There's something just kind of magical and otherworldly about it. And a lot of it's done really simply. I had to write this down because this came up in Wakanda Forever as well. They reused this technique. I think I started counting, and they've done it at least 4 times. of characters appearing on screen, not by walking in from the left or the right, or or panning to them, whatever, but by standing up into the frame.
Yeah.
That kind of the camera is there, and then the character will just stand up and appear from below, and they do something similar with the entrance of Namor. I think in the battle in Wakanda.
Yeah.
And it's something I just see so rarely on screen. It's such a really clever way of introducing a character. It's just lovely. It's very cinematic. It's beautiful.
And I loved, also another thing that about Ganga Zumba and then Zumbi, that is they're abandoning God, the Catholic God, the Portuguese God, but not the gods, the gods of nature, the Orishas, they're totally surrounded by them. But when it comes to the cross of Christ, he uses it as a gun, to attack, which is again, very cleverly done and very clear in terms of what the message that they're trying to convey.
Yeah, it's done well. Messages are when you mentioned the pots earlier. I mean, the pots it represents wealth, right? They've got enough. Yeah. They've got a secure environment. They've got enough stuff that they need pots to hold them. And at the same time, it's very clear that this utopia, it's not perfect. They're going to disagree. They're going to argue a little bit, but they will hang together.
And again, it's about resources, right? It's a land that had it all, like Wakanda. So it was a very rich. There was that little scene, where they're fighting over the corn, and then he says, there is no land. I think there was a really great line when he mentions, something about the wind. Do you remember that line?
Yes, yeah. No one owns the wind. No one owns the sun. Yeah, no one owns the water.
The land is of everyone.
Yeah. It's. I think it does have this sort of painterly and yet surreal quality at times. Even given the technology of the early '80s, it was probably filmed in like '82, '83. So it is kind of Fellini-esque to me too. I mean, I sometimes hate to admit that I'm a big fan of Fellini because I don't think his messages are as clear. So this has the advantage of having some really clear messages with
has
this
that
sort
influence, exactly. Has that influence,
yeah, I think it's definitely. I think Fellini's in there, and I think there's this also. There's an inherent contempt for violence in this film, too. They don't spend a lot of time killing people. People die pretty easily. It's gruesome enough, but we don't need to see people really bleeding out. It's just... And I think that's because the filmmakers probably aren't that interested in the violence. They just need that as the plot point. Okay, we had to kill some Portuguese or some of our guys get killed. But they don't dwell on it because that's not that important. The messages of the film are more important.
I agree.
I started making a little list of the parallels with Wakanda Forever, and I think it's kind of synthesis of bringing the two films together. So they both start with like an isolated, defended, unbeatable black nation. Yeah. And they both have this kind of inciting incident, I suppose, of having to resist European colonizers who come in and try and take resources, either whether the resources are vibranium or whether the resources are slaves, but these are the resources that the community has. There's like an abortive attack which results in the kidnap of a child, which is exactly the same thing that happens in Wakanda Forever, and the kind of the people are split into two factions: those by the sea and those who are inland, which is just the same as Wakanda Forever. But and I think you mentioned earlier kind of like the similar themes about its kind of parenthood. Sacrifice, leadership, this kind of the funerals and death is all kind of all intertwined together. But I came away thinking that Quilombo made this extra step, which Wakanda Forever didn't. They made the step of unifying the factions to fight the colonizers.
Exactly.
And that's just kind of the final step that Wakanda Forever doesn't do, either because they don't want to, or they're saving it for the next film.
It has to be open-ended somehow. And I feel like Ryan Coogler must have seen this film. I mean, because it's similar. I mean, he's probably working more from Marvel material, I guess, but I would think as a filmmaker, he would have seen this film.
Yeah, I agree. I think, it's a landmark. I think you study this in film history, and especially if you are going to make a film about black culture, right, that you definitely have to watch Quilombo.
Well, sounds like a hit.
Well done, Andres Lorente. Incredible, I have to say, when I saw that comparison, and I hadn't seen Wakanda, but I had seen Quilombo, I was so pleased in terms of, like how how they marry and how one of them is, as we always say, it's ahead of its time, and how long it took to get to something like Wakanda Forever.
You are such a polite guest. You're coming back for sure, saying nice things about me.
No, it was brilliant. It was just such a clever. Yeah, it was very good. Thank you.
Well, we just have time to quickly go over what else is playing at this theatre. What else have you seen lately?
I actually have seen The Wonder. Have you seen that with Florence Pugh? It was done by Sebastian Lellieu, who studied at our school, London Film School.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh.
And it's a small little film, but actually very, very good. She's amazing, Florence Pugh, the actress. And it's basically, Sebastian is Chilean. I think he started as a screenwriter, and he made a film, I think it was A Fantastic Woman. Have you seen that film? That was also very good. And he's now made The Wonder, set in the UK. And which, again, I thought that perhaps it wouldn't be so good because it's English language. But no, it's basically about... a psychological thriller / drama about this nurse that is going to find out about this child who hasn't eaten, who's been fasting for 3 or 4 months, and to try to understand what's wrong with this girl. And it's about religion and like good against evil type of story, but it's very eerie, very interesting. Incredibly well shot, with remarkable performances, including the girl that plays, the fasting girl, that is, I think is an Irish girl, Anna O'Donnell, I believe. And then, incredible.
Is it a theatrical release?
Yeah, it had a theatrical release, and I think now it's on Netflix. I saw it in London, It was the last film. I saw it at Curzon.
I think it is on Netflix because it was just recommended to me, and now I'm so happy to hear that you enjoyed it, because you stole my thunder a little bit, but you're a polite guest, so I'm going to thank you anyway. Because I haven't really seen anything else other than Quilombo and Wakanda Forever in the last couple of weeks, but this is number one on my list. It does look great. It looks a period piece. It looks like it's 16 or 1700, something like that. Almost looks like Salem witch trials.
I forgot to mention that very important detail.
Yeah. It's definitely a period piece. So that is top on my list. It looked like a great trailer. So for sure, that's that is on Netflix. It's not playing in my theater right now. What about for you, Jimmy?
From the sublime to the ridiculous.
Yeah.
The other night we. The children were out. My children are old enough now to kind of go out without adult supervision, more or less. So we had a couple of hours, and so we chose to spend those couple of hours watching American Made, a Tom Cruise film directed by Doug Liman. And I don't know whether you've seen it. It's about drug running using small planes in like the 1980s.
Oh, really?
Between the Caribbean and the United States. And it's a little bit like, imagine if you really, really enjoyed the last 45 minutes of Goodfellas and thought, you know what, that should be an entire film on its own. I know, I'll make it, but I'll put planes in it. And that's what it is. It's fine. The most notable, most fun thing about it is that Tom Cruise appears.
Yeah.
He's the lead, and he is playing a guy who is very stupid. And it's quite nice to see Tom play a guy who actually, he doesn't have the answers. He's actually pretty thick and constantly messes up. So it's enjoyable for that.
That's wonderful. That was my brother just recommended that. I think he'd listened to one of our listeners on the Maverick podcast, and he said, "This is you're reminded that Tom Cruise can act sometimes, and I'm sure he does well as a stupid guy. I'm sure he plays intelligent guys well as well." Tom, don't listen to this or don't get mad.
We love you, Tom.
But now I've got 2 films to see, and then in the theaters here, there's this thing called The Menu. Guys, have you seen this one with?
Ray Fiennes.
Ray Fiennes is in it,
I really
which also looks
intriguing.
intriguing.
I'm very intrigued by that film,
Okay.
I love him. I think he's excellent. And they had really good reviews. I read some really good reviews,
Okay, excellent. So I've got more. I've put together more of a film list here. Thank you both. Rather than saying anything that in particular that I've talked about or seen recently.
Right. Well, this has been the Two Real Cinema Club. Thank you so much for joining us, Inês. Wonderful.
Thank you. What a pleasure. Thank you very, very much.
I promise I'll work on my Portuguese pronunciation before we speak again.
I don't know if there are that many Portuguese films that you want to compare it with, but yeah. I'll think of a few.
Yes.
And
I was just going to say thanks again for coming. Yeah, you are the greatest of all time. This was the best podcast ever.
ever.
Next time, I think maybe we should do 2 suggestions that you have.
Yeah.
No pressure. Okay. I'll try to think of a very complicated title so that you can't pronounce. So yeah, I'm off the hook and never come back again. You'll never revive me
more
again.
than 3 syllables and we're lost. Right. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. And we will be back next time with 2 more films. Until then, thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye. Thank you.